I'm Nora Benson, 68 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've been living in the basement of the house I built with my late husband. This morning, my daughter-in-law slammed her fist on my kitchen table so hard the sugar bowl jumped. "We've lived here for free for 4 years. Nora!" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You can't just throw us out." The sunlight was pouring through the window, landing on the papers between us, official court documents, the kind that end arguments. I took a slow breath, steady enough that she could hear it, and said quietly, "Not anymore." For a moment, I saw my reflection in the window, gray hair, tired eyes, and a woman who'd been silent too long. Then I saw her reflection next to mine, young, furious, and convinced she could take what wasn't hers. Ethan, my son, stood frozen by the doorway. He didn't move, didn't say a word. 4 years ago, he begged me to let them stay. "Just until we get back on our feet, Mom," he said, and like a fool, I believed him. Now. The air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said, every insult swallowed, every door slammed, every night I spent listening to footsteps above my head in the home that used to be mine. I slid the envelope toward her. "You have 48 hours, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "After that, I'm changing the locks." She stared at me, speechless, before her face twisted in fury, and that was when I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. When Ethan first called me that spring, I hadn't heard his voice in weeks. He sounded nervous, his tone stretching between pride and exhaustion. "Mom," he said, "Kayla's pregnant. We're gonna need a place to stay for a while." The silence that followed was heavy. I remember looking around my kitchen, the same one my husband and I had built tile by tile 40 years ago. The air smelled like lavender and coffee, and for a moment, I could almost feel my husband there, nodding at me from the old wooden chair he used to sit in. "Of course," I said, without hesitation. "You'll stay here until you get back on your feet." It was the easiest yes I'd ever said, and the one that would cost me the most. When they arrived, the house suddenly felt alive again. Kayla carried boxes even though she was 6 months pregnant, insisting she could manage. Ethan followed behind, lugging the heavier ones, smiling at me with that boyish grin I hadn't seen in years. They thanked me over and over, and I kept saying it was nothing. The first few nights were lovely. We ate dinner together, watched old movies, even laughed until tears ran down my face. Kayla made lasagna, and Ethan fixed the back door that had been creaking for months. For a little while, I thought maybe this was what I needed: noise, laughter, family. Then came the small things. Kayla asked if she could rearrange the furniture in the living room to make more space for the baby. I said sure, even though the couch had been in that same corner since the day we bought it. She painted the walls a pale gray, covering up the warm yellow my husband loved. "Gray is calming," she said, smiling sweetly, and I told myself it wasn't worth a fuss. Ethan started coming home later and later. He said he was picking up odd jobs, trying to save money, and I believed him. But I noticed he stopped talking much. When I'd ask how things were, he'd mumble something about Kayla being stressed. Soon, Kayla began talking to me like I was her tenant, not her mother-in-law. "Nora, could you not use the main bathroom? It's better if I keep it sanitized for the baby." I bit my tongue. She started labeling shelves in the fridge. Kayla's meals. "Do not touch." I tried to laugh it off, tell myself it was pregnancy hormones, that she was nesting, but every small change made the house feel less mine. One evening, I was sewing a little blanket for the baby in the den when Kayla came in without knocking. She stood there, hands on her hips, looking at the fabric like it was something dirty. "Please don't make things for the baby," she said softly but firmly. "I want everything to be new." Something in me cracked that night, quietly. I packed the half-finished blanket away and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the faint sound of the TV upstairs. Their laughter floated down the stairs, and I realized I was already being left out of a family I had helped build. Still, I told myself it was temporary, that once the baby came, everything would feel right again. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The warmth in my house had turned cold, and the woman who called me Mom had begun to look at me like a stranger living in her way. It's strange how quickly a home can stop feeling like one. It doesn't happen in a single argument or a slammed door. It happens quietly, through little changes that start to sting before you even realize why. Kayla started with the curtains. She replaced my floral ones with heavy blackout drapes, saying they were better for the baby's sleep. Then she boxed up the family photos on the hallway wall, explaining she needed the space for her decor vision. I watched her stack pictures of my wedding, my husband in his Navy uniform, and Ethan as a boy, into a plastic bin like they were clutter. I remember standing there, holding one photo in my hand, the one where my husband was holding Ethan at the beach. Kayla smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, Nora, I'll keep them safe." She said it kindly, but it felt like a door closing. After that, she began managing the house like she owned it. She made weekly grocery lists, rearranged the pantry, and once, when I came home from my sewing group, I found the locks had been changed on 2 of the upstairs rooms. Ethan said it was for safety because they'd started keeping baby items there. But when I tried the doorknob and felt the click of the lock, I knew something was wrong. I still had my small routines. I made coffee at dawn, tended to the roses out front, and called my sister once a week. But even those became a problem. Kayla told me the smell of coffee made her nauseous, and that the phone calls were too loud while she napped. So I started tiptoeing around my own house, whispering in my own kitchen. When the baby was born, everything got worse. Kayla's parents visited and acted as though they owned the place. Her mother referred to the nursery as our baby's room, and her father asked if I planned to move to a senior facility soon. I laughed it off, pretending it was a joke, but their eyes didn't smile. I tried helping with the baby at first. I'd warm bottles, fold little onesies, rock her when she cried. But one morning, Kayla took the baby from my arms and said, "I appreciate the help, Nora, but I think you're overstimulating her." Then she turned and walked upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room, hands still cupped in the air where the baby had been. Ethan barely looked at me anymore. He was always working or sleeping. When he did speak, it was in whispers, as though afraid his wife would hear. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the guilt in his eyes, but he never said anything. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found all my dishes gone from the kitchen cabinets. The blue china my husband had bought me for our 30th anniversary, gone. In their place were sleek white plates and glass bowls, everything sterile and soulless. When I asked Kayla where my dishes were, she said, "Oh, they didn't match the theme. I donated them." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty shelves and the single photograph I'd managed to save. It was just me and my husband smiling on our porch, back when this house was full of warmth. I whispered to the picture, "I don't recognize this place anymore." And as I turned off the light, I heard Kayla laughing upstairs, a bright, sharp laugh that echoed through the walls like a warning. Something deep inside me said this wasn't just disrespect. It was the beginning of something darker. The day I moved into the basement, no one said a word about it. It just happened. Kayla told me the guest room upstairs needed to be converted into a play area, and Ethan, sweet, quiet Ethan, just stood there, eyes on the floor. I didn't argue. I packed my clothes, folded my blankets, and carried them down the narrow stairs one by one. The basement smelled of dust and old paint. The ceiling was low, the concrete floor cold under my feet. There was no window, just a single bulb that hummed when I turned it on. Kayla brought down a small cot from the garage and said, "It's only temporary, Nora, until we organize everything upstairs." Temporary lasted 4 years, the first weeks. I tried to make the space feel like mine. I laid down a rug, put up a little lamp, and set my husband's photograph on a crate I used as a nightstand. At night, I could hear footsteps above me, the rhythm of their new life, while I stared at the pipes overhead and tried to remember what sunlight felt like. I wasn't allowed to use the kitchen after 9 because the baby needs quiet. I wasn't allowed to invite friends over because the baby could catch something. Eventually, I wasn't allowed to use the washing machine either because Kayla said I wasn't loading it correctly. So I adapted. I washed my clothes in the sink, cooked simple meals in a small toaster oven I bought with my pension money, and pretended I was fine. But there were nights when I'd hear Kayla's laughter drifting through the floorboards, sharp and carefree, and I'd feel a bitterness I didn't recognize. I hated that sound, not because she was happy, but because I wasn't allowed to be. Ethan would sometimes come downstairs after everyone was asleep. He'd sit on the last step, not coming all the way down, just sitting there like a child in trouble. "Mom," he'd whisper, "I'm trying to fix this." I wanted to believe him, but every time he went back up those stairs, the sound of the door closing felt heavier. One night, I woke up to the basement light flicking off. I went upstairs, half asleep, only to find the door locked. I knocked, called his name. No one answered, so I went back down, sat on my cot, and stared at the dark. That was when I realized I wasn't living there anymore. I was being kept there. And for the first time, I started thinking about how to leave, not as a guest, but as an owner, taking back what was hers. It was late, close to midnight, when I heard them talking. The basement air was still, but voices floated through the floorboards, muffled and sharp. I turned off my small lamp and listened. Kayla's tone was low, fast, the kind people use when they're planning something they shouldn't. "She's old, Ethan. Once the house deed is in your name, it's done. She can't touch it." My blood went cold. There was a pause, and then Ethan's voice, soft, hesitant. "I don't know, Kayla. It's still Mom's name on everything." "Not for long," she said. "I already filled out the transfer forms. You just need to sign them. Think about our future, not hers." I sat there on the cot, gripping the edge of my blanket, feeling my heart pound in my throat. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was just exhaustion. But then I heard her say it again, clear as day. "She doesn't even belong here anymore." I don't remember how long I stayed frozen like that. The next morning, I went through the motions, made coffee quietly, smiled when she walked in, but every breath felt heavier. I was living above a trap, and they didn't even bother hiding it anymore. That afternoon, I called my old friend Evelyn. She used to work at the county clerk's office before she retired. We hadn't spoken in months. When she answered, her voice sounded surprised. "Nora, honey, are you okay?" I told her everything. Not the full story, not yet, but enough that she understood the fear in my voice. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Come by tomorrow and bring whatever papers you still have." When I showed her the old deed, she squinted at the signature lines and frowned. "If she's trying to transfer ownership without consent, that's fraud. You need a lawyer." She scribbled down a name, Mark Heller, elder rights attorney. The next morning, I met him in a small office downtown. He listened, really listened, and when I finished, he said quietly, You've got more power than you think. Mrs. Benson. We'll handle this legally, not emotionally." For the first time in years, someone spoke to me like I wasn't invisible. That night, when I returned home, I looked up at the ceiling above my basement bed. Every creak and footstep sounded different now, not like oppression, but like evidence. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the noise. I was ready to record it. The morning of the eviction was brighter than it had any right to be. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that usually made me want to water my roses. But that day, I didn't even look at the garden. I just waited by the front window, the court papers folded neatly in my hands. Evelyn sat beside me, her fingers laced around a cup of tea. "You don't have to be afraid," she said gently. "I'm not," I told her, and realized it was true. At exactly 10 o'clock, a dark sedan pulled into the driveway. Mark stepped out first, his briefcase tucked under one arm, followed by 2 police officers. The sound of their shoes on the pavement echoed through the house. Kayla was in the kitchen, humming to herself while she sliced fruit. Ethan was upstairs, probably pretending to be asleep. I could feel the tension in my chest, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release, years of silence breaking open. When Mark knocked, I didn't wait for Kayla to answer. I opened the door. "Come in," I said, my voice calm and steady. Kayla turned around, knife in hand, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What's going on?" Mark set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out the papers. "By order of Multnomah County Court, this property is to be vacated within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in removal by law enforcement." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Kayla laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're kidding, right? She's your client? She doesn't even live here." Mark didn't flinch. "She owns this house, Mrs. Benson, every inch of it, and any attempt to alter that ownership was a criminal act." Ethan appeared on the stairs, pale as a ghost. "Kayla," he whispered. "Don't." But she did. She exploded, and the knife clattered onto the counter as she slammed her hands down. "We've lived here for 4 years. We made this house better. She turned toward me, her voice breaking. "You can't just throw us out. Nora." The officers stepped forward, calm but firm. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." She spun back toward me, tears streaking her cheeks. "You'd do this to your own son? To your grandchild?" My throat tightened, but I didn't back down. "I didn't do this to you," I said softly. "You did this to yourself." Something in her eyes snapped. She lunged forward and slapped me, hard. The sound cracked through the room. I didn't move. I just stood there, my cheeks stinging, my heartbeat steady. Evelyn gasped. One of the officers stepped between us. "That's enough," he said firmly. "You need to leave." Kayla broke then. The anger drained out of her face, replaced by shock. She turned to Ethan, desperate. "Say something. Tell them she's lying." But Ethan didn't. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised, ashamed, broken, small. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry." I nodded once. "I know." When the officers escorted them outside, the baby started crying in the car seat. Kayla's sobs joined in, a messy symphony of regret and disbelief. I watched from the doorway until the car turned the corner and disappeared. For the first time in 4 years, the house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a long moment. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It felt like freedom. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows like it was trying to apologize for all the darkness that had lived here. I made coffee for the first time in months, strong and bitter, the way my husband used to drink it. The smell filled the kitchen, chasing away the ghost of Kayla's lavender air freshener. It was strange how silence could feel so alive. I spent the day cleaning, not because the house was dirty, but because I needed to touch everything again. I opened the windows, washed the dishes that had been replaced, and found one of my old blue china plates hidden in the back of a cabinet. I held it to my chest and laughed. "You waited for me," I whispered. In the afternoon, Evelyn came by with a bag of groceries and that knowing smile she always had. "You doing okay?" she asked. I nodded. Better than okay. We ate soup together in the kitchen, sunlight stretching across the table like an old friend. She told me the court paperwork had gone through. The house was officially back in my name. With no contest, I thought I'd cry. But I didn't. I just sat there smiling, letting the quiet do the talking. Later, after she left, I went down to the basement. The air was still musty, but it didn't feel like a prison anymore. I unplugged the little lamp, folded the thin blanket, and carried everything upstairs. Then I shut the basement door, locked it from the outside, and whispered, "Never again." That night, I slept in my old bed, the one by the window facing the garden. The moonlight spilled across the sheets, soft and silver. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of being trapped. I dreamt of open doors, of laughter that didn't hurt. When I woke up, I opened the window and breathed in the morning air. The roses had bloomed again, bright, stubborn things, refusing to die no matter how long they'd been ignored. I smiled at them and thought, maybe I'm like that too. A week after the house became truly mine again, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was yellowed, the ink faded, and the return address stopped me cold. It was from my husband. The postmark was dated nearly 10 years ago. Somehow, it had been lost in the system, traveling through time just to find me now. My hands trembled as I opened it, careful not to tear the edges. His handwriting was the same as I remembered, steady, thoughtful. My dearest Nora, if you're reading this, it means life has moved on without me, and you're learning how to live again. I hope you fill the house with laughter, even if it's your own. And if, one day, someone tries to take that peace from you, fight for it. Because a home is not made of walls or paint. It's made of courage, love always. Daniel. I read it twice, then 3 more times, until the words blurred through my tears. I walked out to the porch, the letter still in my hand. The sun was setting, turning the sky gold and pink, the same colors that used to light our evenings together. For the first time in years, I spoke out loud, as if he could hear me. You were right, Daniel. I fought for it. The breeze caught the edge of the paper, and I held it close to my chest. Then I went back inside, to the hum of my sewing machine waiting on the table. I sat down, threaded the needle, and pressed the pedal. The sound filled the house, steady, soft, alive. And for the first time in a long, long while, it truly felt like home.